Hi, everyone. It is 3 o'clock right now. So I'm just going to go over a few technical things, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Lloyd, who is going to get the session started. So welcome. My name is Kara Street. I am the Vice President for the Manitoba Social Sciences Teachers Association, and I'm just going to be managing the tech for this session. So if you have any questions for any of our presenters, please type them into the chat, and then we are going to do a Q&A at the end of the session today. So I will collect all those questions, and then we will pose them to our presenters at the end. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Lloyd, who is going to start our session today. Thank you.
Okay, welcome everyone to the roundtable Neoliberalism Costs Talk is Cheap, a case for more dialogue and deliberation in the social studies classroom. My name is Lloyd. I am the Executive Director of Global College at the University of Winnipeg, but most importantly, and more importantly, is I was a high school classroom social studies teacher for 25 years. And this is a panel discussion, and the panel will explore dialogue and deliberation in the social studies classroom. Specifically, it will consider the social and political perceptions that impede meaningful discussions. Further, the panel will make a plea for granting more time and space to dialogical encounters. Finally, the panel will consider whether everything is up for discussion and how educators can foster dialogic spaces. But I would like to begin with acknowledging that we are gathered on ancestral land, on Treaty 1 territory, and that these lands are the heartland of the Métis Nation. We also acknowledge that our water is sourced from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation. And before we begin, I'd like to do a really brief introduction of the three panelists in order of their speaking. First, Dr. Shannon Moore is an assistant professor in the Department of Curriculum, Teaching and Learning at the University of Manitoba. Prior to joining the faculty at the University of Manitoba, Shannon taught social studies and English in the public school system in Vancouver, BC. She currently teaches courses in social studies pedagogy and media education, and is conducting research about media literacy in the social studies classroom. She recently co-authored a piece on today's topic in the Alberta Teachers Association journal, One World in Dialogue. The second panelist is Kevin Lopuck. Kevin is the current president of the Manitoba Social Sciences Teachers Association and department head of social studies at Lord Selkirk Regional Comprehensive Secondary School in Selkirk, Manitoba. Kevin recently completed his Master's of Education degree, in which his thesis explored the implementation of the grade 12 global issues, citizenship and sustainability curriculum in the province of Manitoba. When he isn't running around with his 6-year-old daughter, Kevin enjoys reading, cycling, playing hockey, and craft beer. And finally, the third panelist, Kathleen Elgar, is in her 19th year of teaching. Kathleen spent 10 years teaching grade 7 to 9 English and social studies before moving into high school English. Through that time, she has engaged her students in dialogue about important issues of social justice. And when not engaging in this dialogue, Kathleen consumes copious amounts of current affairs podcasts, is a voracious reader, and can be found running laps around others as she completes marathons. So I've introduced the three speakers in the order of which they're going to present. At the end of it, we talked about this yesterday, that we were hoping there'll be a lot of questions and a lot of discussions. So Shannon, over to you.
Thank you so much, Lloyd. So in the first 10 minutes here, I'm basically going to be going through the theoretical framework for our panel today. And by that, I mean, what are the theories that inform our work? And then going forward, Kevin and Kathleen will both be looking at how we can take that up in the classrooms. So in current society, the culture of schools is always already imbued in language, culture, economies, and ideologies. In turn, educators are confronted with pervasive understandings about school, curriculum, teachers, and subject disciplines. We titled our presentation, Neoliberalism Costs Talk is Cheap, as we wanted to recognize that although we're making a strong plea for cultivating dialogic spaces in social studies, there are larger ideological forces that can impede discussion in the classroom, namely neoliberalism. Brace up, I'm going to say neoliberalism about 50 times. Neoliberalism is the reigning ideology of our time. It relies on the market as the organizing principle for all political, social, and economic decisions. The focus in society then is on being productive. One's value is derived from their productivity. While we are speaking today about the influence of neoliberalism in schools, we recognize that this extreme form of capitalism has impacted all elements of our lives. After all, even our walks don't count unless we count them. The pedagogy that emerges from neoliberalism naturalizes competitiveness, individualism, and as Giroux says, hedonism, and discourages ethical considerations. He bluntly states, within this pedagogy, compassion is a weakness, and moral responsibility is scorned because it places human needs over market considerations. By constructing human beings as capital, neoliberalism encourages individualism, eliminates notions of the public good, and erodes the citizenry of a moral or ethical life. As such, neoliberalism forecloses dialogue in and as pedagogy. However, it also exposes the need for such dialogue. Neoliberalism places a market logic on everything in schools. This manifests in many ways. Knowledge is seen as consumable, students are seen as consumers and as products, and the purpose of education is then seen as to prepare students for the workforce. Moreover, neoliberalism legitimizes itself through an audit and surveillance culture that focuses on products as learning or of learning, and of course on testing. In our own province, we've seen many recent articles that confuse the quality of education with the results of standardized tests. These tests are not legitimate markers of student learning, nor do they reflect what is valued in provincial curricula. Yet the results are used to create a neoliberal feedback loop that rationalizes more market intervention in education. Value in this context is placed on that which can be measured, and efficiency, individualism, and competition are encouraged. As Stephen Ball explains, neoliberalism alters the way we value ourselves and value others, how we think about what we do and why we do it. Increased measurement, managerialism, audit, and surveillance creates existential anxiety, and teachers become what Ball refers to as ontologically insecure, constantly doubting their own self-worth against these performance targets, even though they know these tools are not legitimate reflections of curriculum teaching and learning. Within this larger neoliberal context of measurement, teachers can come to feel insecure about making space for dialogic encounters. Specifically, teachers can feel there's no time in our classrooms, that there's no space to tarry, to dwell. After all, making space counters that reign of efficiency. Dialogic encounters require space to welcome and a rest time, where it is brought to a standstill because the topic and the people need our devotion. Moreover, teachers often feel that they need to get through the curriculum, privileging knowledge over skill, and deliberation is a skill, one that undoubtedly needs to be fostered in these divisive times. While there certainly are ways to evaluate discussion, dialogue, and deliberation, as Kathleen may share with you, teachers can sometimes shy away from taking time to foster dialogic spaces as there is, quote, nothing to show for it in the end. Yet, rich learning can happen through dialogue, even if it is not measured, or precisely because the focus is not measurement. In the same way teachers are overwhelmed by the pervasiveness of neoliberal market logic, students are similarly influenced. That is, students have also come to see value in what can be measured. We hear this in our classrooms in the pervasive ask, is this for marks? In a context that privileges efficiency and productivity, discussions that settle in, that seemingly go nowhere and are often left unfinished are met with impatience. They are not recognizable to our students as education. Moreover, a culture that fuels individualism and competition does not foster the empathy and patience that is required in dialogic spaces. These are the larger cultural factors that overwhelm educative spaces and can often get in the way of the time and space that is needed to just talk. As a means to confront the rate of individualism, the erosion of community, and the growing political chasm in society, we need to encourage students to see and hear one another, to see their connections to one another, and to see their responsibilities to one another. This requires a dialogic encounter. If nothing else, this moment has demonstrated that we need to more fully listen to one another. Ethics demands attunement towards the demand of the other. You must see me in relation to your opinion. In hermeneutics, the ability to encounter the other in dialogue requires modesty and humility. In dialogue, sorry, I apologize. In hermeneutics, the ability to encounter the other in dialogue requires modesty and humility, in that we know that our knowledge is limited and in need of revision. It requires courtesy, in that we acknowledge our indebtedness to others and welcome their capacity, as Moule says, to teach us something new. This photo symbolizes an ill in our society: the inability to participate in dialogue at all, never mind with humility or courtesy. Instead, it has become common practice to shout our positions out the window of trucks, behind protest signs, or in 140 characters, and then close our ears to the response. In hermeneutic dialogue, it is not enough to advocate your position. You must recognize how your position impacts the other. This does not entail one to simply acquiesce, but to earnestly hear the voice of the other. The other, through their experiences, has something to say that is true about the subject matter. In this way, understanding, according to Gadamer, is not merely a matter of putting oneself forward and successfully asserting one's point of view, but being transformed into a communion in which we do not remain that which we are. The practice of dialogue and deliberation is not automatic. Educators need to foster dialogic spaces. This importantly communicates to your students that you value discussion, dialogue, without an end in mind. As the practice of dialogue requires practice itself, teachers often turn to a variety of discussion methods. These are certainly important, and Kathleen will share many with us today. However, teachers also need to be prepared to foster unplanned and unstructured discussions. As we know, students often bring topics to us, and we are confronted in that moment with the need to respond to these inquiries. We cannot shy away from discussions in our classroom. As Joel Westheimer tweeted just this week, schools and democratic societies must teach students how to ask uncomfortable questions. Kevin?
Thanks, Shannon. That was fantastic. Hard act to follow. I thought I'd start just by bringing to attention this book that I recently picked up and read, and it's The Case for Contention in Teaching Controversial Issues. It's an American book by Zimmerman and Robertson, but it really frames this this discussion we're having today, because they talk about there being the need for 4 conditions for controversial subjects. So they talk about that there must be dispute, right? That the parties to this dispute are fairly competent with respect to the issue itself, that the dispute is persistent and there is an emotional investment, and that matter of public concern is at stake or are at stake. And then Zimmerman and Robertson go on, again, influenced by Thorndike. They talk about how they frame these into 3 different categories, I guess. So an issue is maximally controversial when 4 out of these 4 conditions are met. And then in expert public disagreements are disagreement that occurs between experts and a significant portion of the public. So that would be hitting on numbers 1, 2, and 4. And then a category which is the disagreement solely among experts themselves, which they refer to as scholarly debate that occurs without public concern, which would hit numbers 1 and 2. And why I bring this up is because as Zimmerman and Robertson talk about in the book, the approach to engagement with each of these types of issues is going to vary. So for example, if we sort of work backwards here, the disagreement solely among experts, a scholarly debate, is great to introduce to your students, because that allows students to then, it might be seen as being too difficult if it's a scholarly debate, but it allows kids to, it leads them to inquiry, and it allows them to, move themselves from, transmission of knowledge to creation of knowledge. And then expert public disagreements. Now this is tough because we see a lot of this right now in society. So we can't ignore the fact, teachers can't ignore these issues, but students need to understand the sources of disagreement and be given the tools to analyze them as well. And as Zimmerman and Robertson suggest, we need to be able to help teach students, our students, to learn to trust the experts and get information from the experts. And then finally, their maximally controversial issues where all four of these conditions are met. Again, tough for teachers, but teachers need to teach this as open, right? And that this can include moral issues, and we should engage in these. It's not always going to be moral issues. Some moral issues are going to be have been closed, but we need to engage students in these issues. So I just wanted to, that's sort of my transition into exactly what I wanted to talk about. So Shannon, if you could switch the slide. When I started teaching the global issues classroom in a global issues classroom, global issues curriculum 10 years ago now, when it was first introduced, I found that where the kids really wanted the course to go, and this is something that was even occurring before the curriculum changed, was that they just wanted to talk about what was going on. They had questions. I remember, my very first week of teaching was 9/11. And I remember distinctly being in that classroom, and I had 30 sets of eyes looking at me, and wanting to talk about, like, what happened? Why is this going on? Who's responsible? What's going to happen from here? And I've realized that through 20 years of teaching, that's really what kids want to do in a social studies classroom like global issues. They want to talk about this stuff. And so we need to engage them. And I, for myself, I've done that engagement naturally. Naturally in the sense that I will bring editorials into the classroom and use that as a jumping off point to get discussion going. So, I think Shannon mentioned, or even Nigon mentioned earlier today about, classrooms and teachers, we are political. We are political. There's no avoiding this. We can't hide this, right? And Paulo Freire says it himself, right? Education must begin with the solution of the teacher-student contradiction by reconciling the roles of the contradiction so that both are simultaneously teachers and students. So, that goes to teachers as partners in learning, but also Paulo Freire, washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful and not to be neutral. So teaching is going to be overtly political. We need to encourage these discussions. And as I said, I do that through editorials. And, we can be partners in this. I learn a lot from my students when I sit back and join them in these dialogues, these natural dialogic spaces. And, I do push the discussion for sure. And you know what, that's sometimes the toughest thing for me to do, right? Because if I'm, if I have a class that is, say, fairly progressive in nature, and they're pushing sort of one side of, what the maximally controversial subject, sometimes I will have to push back on and try to, bring in the other side. So I've had a ton of success with this, and I just, if Shannon, if you could switch. It led to me actually writing my thesis about this introduction, the introduction of the global issues curriculum. And what I did was I had interviewed 10 former students about their experience in the global issues classroom. And one of my conclusions to my thesis was that the students did just like talking about things. That was a quote directly from the students. And I wanted to share some of the other quotes because I think this really shows you exactly what the kids are thinking. The first one on the left-hand side of the screen here, I never really had the drive to really try for school. Like it was always a task for me. And I think that the class being based on discussion, it made me much more comfortable. It wasn't a task. Talking isn't a task for me. I mean, how wonderful is that? Like they loved coming in and just talking. And this was great. And this is the whole point of fostering that, an organic space to discuss about issues, controversial issues that are of importance to society. The second quote in the pink, I remember there was a few of the what I would say is the more popular girls talking about women's image in media, and I'm thinking, why are you thinking about this? Like, you're a popular girl, good-looking girl. To me, it's like, how could that ever bother you? Why would you think that? But then, but they did all the time, and they were passionate about it, and they wanted to change it, wanted to do something about it. And it's like, I guess it made me think, you can't judge a book by its cover, right? This is an awesome reflection of one of these conversations that we had in the classroom organically, right? And finally here, I think my favorite part was where we would just discuss and debate, and it would get pretty heated sometimes because it made me realize how passionate everyone is. Like even when I'm sure my opinion was right on something, everyone else was equally sure that their opinion was right. So that was my favorite part. And one of the ones I didn't put up here, but was also in another part of my conclusion, was what the kids really appreciated was just like being treated like an adult, and having their opinions valued, and for them to be given the time and the space to have these discussions in a place that is safe and welcoming of these discussions. So that's been my success. I start all my global issues classes talking about what's going on in the world, try to bring in editorials to foster this discussion. And sometimes, sometimes it takes 5 minutes, sometimes it takes the hour. But to me, it has been the most powerful component of my teaching of global issues. So that's what's worked for me. I'm going to pass it over to Kathleen because Kathleen has some awesome strategies to help if you need. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. You made me just think of some things to kind of start with. And I think one of the things that we as teachers and probably just human beings and adults want is our children to be able to communicate and to be critical thinkers. And this is the place to do it. The classroom's a safe space. We can make it a safe space. And sort of what Kevin mentioned was, like, we do all have opinions, and obviously there's a time and a place to share our opinion, and we have a lot more experience. But I find I use the phrase like, I hear you, a lot more. So just this, kids can have a differing opinion, and acknowledging them, even sometimes when it's off base, you have to gear it back. But just that idea of like, I hear you, and they don't always have a place to express their opinions. And if we can do it in a safe space and figure out how to do it appropriately, then when they go out in the world, then hopefully they can be conversationalists and critical thinkers and contribute and not be adversarial in those sorts of ideas. So I just want to share a few strategies that work for me. Currently, I am in the English classroom. I have taught social studies, but I've got a few strategies that I use that are like quick, everyday sort of routine. The kids get used to them. And then a couple that take a little bit more planning to them. So some of my, I would say, like low risk, don't take planning. All my kids have notebooks. Often I give a prompt. So a lot of times if the kids can at least write, so let's write and then share. And so I'll usually use things like a whip around. So I'll pose a certain question, I'll get them to write, it doesn't have to be in paragraphs, just getting ideas down. And then it's like starting with Joey and we're whipping around the classroom, and it's low stakes. Sometimes kids will repeat what somebody said earlier, so that makes them feel safe. And if needed, sometimes they just pass, and that's okay too. But often that whip around, and then kids are throwing up their hands because they want to add something or they want to reiterate what somebody said. And so that just generates some more conversation. So that's sort of a quick low stakes. So I just call it a whip around. We start somewhere and we point in the direction and we keep going. Obviously, Think, Pair, Share has been around for who knows how long. But that idea of let's think, let's write. I think if kids have the chance to write something first and then turn and talk, and if we turn and talk with someone that we feel comfortable with or safe with, then we come back together and we can talk as a large group. And as a teacher, you know that they're talking and you can see that they've written things. And so you can kind of not pick on, but you know that there's been conversation that you can bring to the forefront, you can bring to the table all together too. So you see them doing like the legwork first. So it's not sort of starting from scratch and they're nervous about saying something to a big group. They've had that chance to kind of run it by someone nearby after maybe they've gotten some of their ideas out on paper. Another strategy that I like to use, I will often use certain articles, try to bring in questions that have varying opinions, and I'll just put a T chart up on my board, and every kid gets a sticky note. They put their name on the sticky note, and I'll put the question on the top of the T chart, and usually it's agree or disagree or yes or no or whatnot. And they come in, they see the question, they grab their name, and they just stick it on there. And then they have to kind of think about where they stand, why they put it where they did. Sometimes they'll put it right in the middle, and that's good for conversation too, because they're either not sure or they've got opinions on both sort of sides of the situation. But then you've got their names, you've got it up on the board, they've already engaged. I think that's the biggest problem, or the biggest hurdle, is like getting them engaged in the first place. So just by getting them to stick their name on something, then they're engaged in the conversation. And then usually you can offer kids to speak, but then you can also call certain names because the names are right up there, right? And as a teacher, you know who to kind of go to first, right? Or who to encourage or whatnot. So you have sort of that to kind of get you started with. So those are some sort of low stakes, don't really take much planning. I guess another one I've used recently is they just have a piece of paper with an A on it, a D on it. I pose questions. We were doing Romeo and Juliet. So the other day was, do teenagers really know what love is? And it was an A or it was a D. And then they just go, like they're having conversations. They can kind of see what their friends say. Pre-COVID, I would usually put agree, disagree, somewhat disagree around my classroom, and they would move. And then they're in groups already and they're turning and talking. And then we come together and get the different perspectives. And sometimes kids would move from one to the other after hearing something. And so that kind of got some discussion generated here. So, and then I just want to talk a little bit about another strategy I use that has a little bit more planning. So I think with those strategies, they're good for your behaviors on your report cards. They're good for your comments on your report cards. Like if you're talking about assessment, right? And sort of talking about, oh, we have to assess, I don't have time, it's not worth marks. That helps with the conversations with parents. It helps with conversations with kids, right? Because you're observing those things. But I also use Socratic seminars, lots of information online. So I'm just going to do a little rundown, or you can ask me about it later. But a Socratic seminar is something that I do address and I do assess, and I do have a rubric with. And so what is Socratic seminar? I guess you could do it in a variety of different ways. I usually do it based off a novel or a text that we are reading. And you basically have a group of students who guide their own discussions, usually based off of essential questions. I get them to annotate text. They use a lot of sticky notes, and they come to the table for like a 15-20-minute discussion in my case. And I'm assessing their critical thinking. I'm assessing their ability to engage, to listen, to build on each other's conversations. I'm assessing their ability to bring evidence to the table in the case of quotes and page numbers and specific pieces from the text. I'm assessing that they can make connections to other things. And it's a student-led discussion. I sit on the outside. I always tell them I'm the kind of creepy person that sits on the outside and takes notes and assesses you as you're having this conversation. And I only jump in if it maybe goes off base or they're analyzing something that it's just not the way it's supposed to be. They're a little miscued in that sense. But it is a formal discussion. It could be led with specific questions, but usually I just leave it to be open-ended. It would be a great sort of way to assess if you were, say, watching a documentary and then you had some articles associated with that documentary, and maybe you had a piece of fiction or another piece of nonfiction attached with a common theme, and you could pull all of those pieces together to have this discussion. And when I do that, they're sitting in groups, they're sitting in tables, they maintain the same group, and I do it usually 2 or 3 times. So the first time it's low stakes, we're trying it out, I'm still assessing you, but in the end, I'm assessing your best performance. So if they had an off day, some of them just really don't know what it's going to look like the first time and they're nervous. But usually by the third conversation, they're ready to go. Their book is full of sticky notes. They've come prepared. And usually the commentary is good. They like to be involved in the conversation. They like to have control. And they do get sort of credit for just being there, and for, you can tell with body language that they're listening, that they're nodding, that they might not always be the one to bring something to the table, but they're still engaged in the conversation. And then I give them a chance afterwards to do a reflection, to include maybe things that they didn't get a chance to say or they were too nervous to say. But that generates conversation. And with the varying groups in the classroom, afterwards, I can address sort of big ideas that were talked about, some really interesting points that maybe a group pulled out, and we can come back together and talk about it. So that's sort of the idea of a Socratic seminar. I know I'm running kind of short on time here. So I guess almost to pull off of that idea is, I feel like a couple of things that really work for me in terms of getting the kids to talk a little bit more is really that focus on annotating, teaching annotation, teaching interaction with the text, because if they've read something, if they understand, if they can analyze, if they can pull things out, if they can question a text, if they can express their emotions just through writing and through reading, then I think they can bring it to the table for a conversation. And just really quickly, I think the other thing that I do, I was really kind of nervous about this in the beginning, but every Friday we do public speaking. And again, it's low stakes. It's not for marks. I don't know that they actually realize that sometimes, but because they all end up really doing it. But for example, on yesterday, because we don't have Friday this week, yesterday it was 45 seconds. So they had to stand. We talk about just projecting voice, all that kind of stuff. But I said 45 seconds. I have a random word generator. You're going to talk about a word for 15 seconds. You're switching to another word for 15 seconds. You're switching to another word for 15 seconds. So I think if they can do those low stakes, speaking in front of their peers, which they're always nervous about, and sort of breaking that ice, and then they can move into those tougher conversations and be able to express themselves. So some of that, just working on public speaking in general with silly things, will allow them some comfort to talk about some more serious things in the long run. So those are some of the pieces that have worked for me. And obviously bringing in thought-provoking, critical thinking, controversial sort of ideas, obviously always gets them going. So those are some things that work for me. Yeah. In a quick session there.
Lloyd, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thanks to all three of you for this really inspiring your inspiring talks. As a former teacher, I sense your enthusiasm, your passion, and your insight. There are a few questions, and I think Kara was going to field the questions and ask them to you in turn. So Kara, over to you. If not, I have questions. I'm a curious human being. I love discussion, and I'd like to pick people's minds.
So I'm just checking the chat, and we don't have any questions that were typed into the chat, but we did have someone with their hand up earlier. So I'm not sure if, Paul, you still have your question?
Indeed. I have 3 questions. First of all, I love this session. It attracted me because of the topical nature of the title, and I was fascinated by it because it drew me in. So thank you. Another thing is I've concluded that all 3 of you are great teachers. I'd love to be in your classroom, but I have to say I might challenge you on occasion, and because I, like you, believe in dialogue. I looked up dialogic in the thesaurus, and it says a shared dialogue to explore the meaning of something. So my first question is, are you sure we understand neoliberalism? And is it the big bad wolf? Or, as a critic said, is it just an empty vial into which we can pour everything we dislike? That's number 1. Number 2, and this one's for Kevin. I taught global issues too. I taught world politics, and I was always caught in a contradiction as a history teacher. Do you teach them the core content before you throw them into the debates? How much prior knowledge do they need in order to make the most of those discussions? And the third thing is, I was so impressed with with Kathleen, because I would love to work with you, Kathleen. The first thing I'd say to you is go to the Exeter Humanities Institute, because you're in the first stage of developing what you call the Socratic seminar. There's 2 other stages. You are beginning to discover the power of seminars, and it leads from teacher-led to student-led seminars. And there's a staging. But I would highly recommend that you get the Selkirk School Division to pay for you to go to the Exeter Humanities Institute. It stands out as maybe the most profound professional experience in my career.
I guess I'll take the first one because I believe your first one may have been in relation to my own. First off, I'm going to pop in the chat the article from which I mentioned at the beginning that myself and Dr. Scoos wrote together, in which we use the term dialogic encounters, not from the thesaurus, but we are drawing on Gadamer in that, who's a hermeneutic scholar. Secondarily, myself and Tim have written extensively on neoliberalism, and certainly I think you could make that claim that, do we just create the big bad wolf out of a singular overwhelming ideology? There's always going to be an overwhelming ideology that influences the classroom space. But as a K-12 teacher and a university educator, I think we can see the ways that those are manifesting in our classrooms that interfere with the purpose of education. And so certainly there are people that may understand the term differently than I do. Myself and Dr. Scoos have both written about neoliberalism and have been accepted in peer-reviewed journals. So somebody accepts our definition of it or our understanding of it. I'll pass to, I think, Kevin was your next question.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question, Paul. It's a great question, and I think maybe I probably should have done a better job. You're from Manitoba, Paul, or?
I'm actually from, I'm at large across the country.
Okay.
I do all kinds of work with all different provinces, but I'm based in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Okay, so I was just wondering if you knew, if you're familiar with the global issues curriculum at all in Manitoba. So
Yes, generally.
Generally, okay. So yeah, so it's based on it's an inquiry approach. The way I frame, I think the way I want to sort of address this is the way I frame my classroom is that there is a little bit of pre-teaching, and I think even my friend Kara would agree with me because she does the same thing. There is definitely some pre-teaching about ideologies and isms that goes on, some more direct teaching. But generally speaking, I use these editorials and this organic discussion to engage the kids in some of the 10 areas of inquiry that are in the curriculum. And then gradually, as I make my way through the semester with the course, what happens is that we do a little less of the discussion, and I pass it on to the kids to conduct inquiry into these 10 areas. So my hope with this organic discussion is to inspire them to find something that they're interested in, and then they move along into the inquiry portion of the course, where they then share the knowledge that they're getting from that. But the pre-teaching aspect, yes, certainly there is a bit of direct teaching about ideologies and isms.
The last thing was the teacher-directed seminar versus the evolution to a student-led seminar and the challenges of getting there, so that the students actually lead the seminar and you recede a little bit out of the picture, and you focus more on the document. One at the Exeter Institute I was in was, we were there for a week and we studied the US Constitution. That was fascinating. Every day a different topic related to the US Constitution.
Mm-hmm. I guess if I want to jump in with the seminar idea, I found that I guess with the seminars that I've been doing, it is this like gradual release, but for the ones that, for the Socratic seminars that I do, like I'm not involved, but yes, they still are given sort of guiding questions that they can fall back on if needed. I've noticed that as of late, they actually generally don't use those, but we do have a text that they're all reading, right? So they all have that basis for just something to build on and start off of. But yeah, I definitely, the goal is for them to guide it, for them to do everything. And often they don't use my little helpful hints and helpful questions or tips, but yeah, but I like that.
Thank you, Paul, for your questions. We actually
Google the Harkness method.
Yeah,
Google
okay.
the Harkness method.
Okay,
Find that
thank
interesting.
you.
Thank you. We have a couple others that have some questions, and we only have a few minutes left. So I would like to give the floor to Charles Jennings, who has a question.
Hey, thanks so much. Paul, I just did a Harkness today, and good to see you from the Canadian History Seminar too. I really appreciate this. This is Shannon. I really appreciate your scholarly work here, and Kevin, your framework for engaging in this, and all of the ideas were really great. I'm really every day I walk into the classroom and I fully am on board with dialogic discussion and making space, and yet every day there's the possibility for beautiful fireworks to go off or for violence to be enacted from one student on another in language. And so, we read about brave spaces, and it's like Arrow and Clemens. There's a classic article. It's like 10 years old. And then there's a Lily Zhang from Stanford who talks about your brave space sucks, right? And how it's fine to claim a brave space, but to maintain and create that space and cultivate it is a challenging thing, and that it necessarily allows for students of the global majority, for students to be subject to the comments of other students. So I had a great presentation just this week on the Wickstrom case, and it was about the ability to use to protect against hate speech. And then the student wanted to discuss pronouns and whether or not pronouns ought to be used, right? So these are the kind of like high stakes but vitally important conversations we need to have in person. I've done it for 15 years, and every day it's like I've never done it before, and I'm doing it for the 100th time again. And it makes wonderful relationships, it makes me cry, and it also, how the hell do I do it? So there you go. How do I protect the diversity, equity, inclusion, and concerns that I have? Thanks for.
I agree with everything you said. I was like cheering along as you went, and I think my co-presenters and chair would probably say the same thing. It's like the line of how do we foster important conversations while also protecting the students in our class. And I think Kevin Kumashiro probably said when I was doing my early graduate work, he said, never allow somebody's humanity to be debated in your classroom. And I think that has sort of guided my teaching. And whenever students do get into that, we talk about the Charter of Rights in relation to what they're saying. We talk about whether what they're saying goes against school policy. And I am by no means suggesting I have the answer to this, because all of this stuff still happens in my classroom as well. But just to say, like, what do we do to make sure that somebody's humanity does not become debatable? There's a difference between belief and being, and do not allow somebody's being as a human to be debated or to become debatable. And that landed on me and has sort of guided the way that I interact with students whenever I do feel like they are saying things that is putting somebody else's right to be in question. So I'll just pass to my peers on that one.
Unfortunately, actually, it looks like we are out of time. So I think the conference organizers are going to be putting something together where there'll be summaries of some of the presentations and opportunities to contact presenters. So if anybody has questions that were not answered today, that information will be available. I'm not sure if the presenters want to put their emails in the chat or something, if people do want to ask them questions outside of this particular seminar. But I'd like to thank you for so very much for this very thought-provoking and amazing presentation that's obviously provoked a lot of critical thinking and discussion amongst the audience as well. So thank you so much for that. And I'm not sure if anyone has any concluding thoughts, but if you have anything you'd like to say to wrap it up, this would be the time to do so. And if you look into the chat, there are some contact social media and email information from the presenters put in there if you would like to follow up with them. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.